Welcome to the Layman's Seminary. We're continuing our series on doing theology better, and this is part 3. See, I just turned in my proposal for teaching this interactive workshop on doing theology better. And now that I've turned it in, I wanted to do some refining to go into more detail about things, because the proposal is just kind of like the brainstorming of how you're going to do things. But then when you have time to really bring it all out, that's where the real development comes about. And so I think what I'm going to be doing in here is emphasizing synthetic study. In the last video, I think we did summary, outline, synthetic summary, and outline. And I feel like that I need to go in more detail about that. Now, people that have been watching this channel for a while have probably already seen this done. And so there's going to be a little bit of review, a little bit of reference to other videos. But I think that what you'll find in this video will be helpful as we're seeking to do theology better. Okay, so this is a chart that I created for the paper that I was writing, how to do theology better. And so the first part of it is preparation for doing theology, and it would be 6 sessions. Okay, chart 1, tasks for doing theology better from inductive and exegetical study. In this chart, I have a description of inductive study first, and then I have synthetic, and then I have exegesis, and then biblical theology, and then systematic theology. But actually, in practice, and I usually put synthetic study first, because there's so much involved with inductive study. But you can teach a few synthetic principles early on, and this can help somebody who has no experience in the word, and it can be even used for teaching or preaching or stuff like that. And inductive study just helps refine this. So I'm going to, even though this is, the reason I put inductive study first on the chart is because a lot of churchgoers have encountered inductive study through Kay Arthur, Precept Ministries, and stuff like that. And while I don't think that her approach is totally representative of what inductive Bible study is, we're going towards more the exegetical level of inductive study. It's still a good point of reference for introducing your congregation or small group or whatever too. And so that's why I started there. And so basically, let me just talk a little bit. I'm not going to explain everything on the chart, but just these first 2 right here. So whenever you're studying the Bible, you're basically asking the question, what do I see? That's observation. Well, in a descriptive summary sentence, you're giving your first impression. You're writing down what you see, in a sentence. Like, it's almost like you're explaining things, but you're explaining things without having done research. And the idea is that you're almost kind of like making like a commentary of the sentence, of the passage that you're studying. And so it's descriptive like that. So like I could say, John begins his gospel with the mention of the word of God. What he says about the word of God is that he has been in the beginning of creation, and that he was with God, who presumably is the Father or the Holy Spirit as well, and that he was also God in essence. That's a descriptive summary statement. Is that totally accurate? Did I go further than what was in the text? That could be evaluated, but I'm just doing that for demonstrative purposes. That's kind of like how it would sound. You're just trying to describe. I used to use the word paraphrase, but when people think of paraphrase, they're thinking about changing the words. And sometimes when they just change the words or reword things, they don't bring out their impressions. And so I think the term descriptive summary is a little bit better. And then later on, when we talk about exegesis, you'll see that the exegetical idea is like the ideal descriptive statement. Well, we'll talk about that later on. So in interpretation, you're answering the questions by doing research and all of that you did in observation. Well, in an interpretive synthetic summary, you're summarizing the interpretation of the passage. Now, usually I do a preliminary and tentative one, and that's before you go and consult other sources. You're seeking to make some type of interpretive statement about what's going on. And and then this can also translate into an expositional outline. Then of course there's evaluation. You're saying, okay, I've come up with this interpretation. Now, does it make sense in light of other scripture? And then of course application to yourself. And we're going to come back in and talk more in detail about this chart. But I want to bring people's attention to this right here, that that the playlist that we're doing Theology Better, it's underneath Theological Method. I may actually make a playlist calling Doing Theology Better. And then you have a playlist for descriptive summary sentences for entire book. And I'm actually going to include some other descriptive summary resources that I have in playlist form towards the end of the video. And then I also want to mention, notice this is 2022 content. What I've done is so that you can see the development of the layman seminary over the years, I've made a playlist for each one. And so just expect and understand that earlier playlists are going to have glitches. You're going to have preliminary stuff. It's going to be good stuff. But it just, you have to go through and if the sound's bad in a place or something like that, you can skip around and experiment and see what you like. And if you say, hey, I really like that content, but the sound was bad or the image was bad, can you go back and redo that? Can you rework that? Can you implement that in some other place, or show me where you've integrated that to another place? We'll be glad to do that. Keep in mind that when the layman seminary started in a more formal way, it was being taught at my church, and that was before COVID, and it went through various transitions. And so of course COVID has changed things a lot more as well. I'm just trying to orient y'all to this. All right, so here we are in the preparation for Doing Theology session 1 through 6. So in the first video of Doing Theology Better, part 1, we did an introduction, and we talked about how the word theology can be derived from John 1:1, because it talks about the word logos and theos, God. In session 1 and 2, the idea was to demonstrate that believers are already doing theology. And that's why it's called Doing Theology Better, because you're already doing theology. Everyone's doing theology the moment they're trying to study and share something about God to others. And so we want to do it better. So this is actually from my paper. My paper was very concise. It was more instructional, manageable, instruction tone, I guess is the way to put it. So anyway, session 1 through 2, demonstrate that believers are already doing theology. Refer to Ryrie's basic theology where applicable. Build from their current understanding of theology. Explain the word theology from John 1:1. Consider Dillow's final destiny discussion of theological science. Define historical, biblical, and systematic theology, and answer what difference has meditating on theology made in the week. Should be meditating. And so that's what we did in the first video. And you can see that right here as we're going. There's Ryrie's basic theology that we referenced, and we read various things from it concerning this issue to make the argument, yeah, we're all theologians. We're already doing theology. Let's do it better. So build from the current understanding of theology by surfing the negative and positive connotations. That's where you would ask people, what comes to your mind when you hear the word theology? What the negative and what's the positive aspect of theology, that type of thing. I mentioned Erickson because it's one of the textbooks we're using, mainly because the professor says that he's the one that goes into actual theological method. Some of the other systematic theologies don't really talk about method as much or in a as orderly way. But this doesn't mean that this is the definitive thing. My professor has developed his own approach to theology, which we are integrating in these videos. So moving on forward. Explain the origin of the word theology from John 1:1. We talked about that. There it is. It talked about the logos. Here's the word, the range for the way the word can be used. Theos, the same way. This is showing you how they're both being used in the text. I like to show people as much as possible when something is confirmed or affirmed in the original languages, because even if they don't know the original languages, there may be some of them to say, hey, I want to learn how to do that. I want to get an interlinear. Or, hey, I want to learn the languages, Is there opportunity for that? I think if we put everything at a basic level and we don't expose people to a way for them to step up if they want to progress, then we're actually not helping the people we minister to. Take complicated concepts and break it down and then make it accessible to all, but at the same time, do it in such a way that it challenges everyone, no matter what level they're at. Okay, consider the role of presuppositions and pre-understandings of doing theology. Talked about that. This is from Dillo, the topic about theological science we went into in that first video, which he quoted Hodges right here. And then we introduced diverse ways of doing theology. So that's historical, biblical, and systematic, basically. And so I talked a little bit about biblical theology. I mentioned Ryrie's biblical theology. I mentioned a biblical theology of the Old Testament, and I mentioned this one as well. At that time, I didn't own this, but I just recently purchased it because I like it. And I'm going to, whenever we get into the biblical theology section of knowing theology better or doing theology better, we're going to be comparing Ryrie's and this one. That doesn't mean they're the definitive on it. It just means that these have been helpful in my previous studies, as well as Eugene Merrill, Everlasting Dominion. And it's kind of interesting because he was the one that done Old Testament biblical theology in the this one right here, but he does it differently here because this is a theology of the Old Testament. So this in some ways seems more systematic, but it's kind of interesting to think about the different ways that the same author can organize or present things. And so that should give us a better confidence that we can seek to do things how we believe that it should be done, and that everything doesn't have to be so rigid. So while we're talking about method, there's still flexibility within it. Now, I'm still evaluating how much flexibility is actually involved, but I just think that these resources will help you, on that journey. And so if we were doing this, we could assign them homework and help them develop a definition and description of theology. And then the next session, they would come back and talk about it. And that's what that is. And they would basically answer the question, what difference has meditating on theology made in their week? And that's basically making theology practical. The goal for that session is to further ease them into the conversation about theology and the task of theology, help them see the devotional quality of theology, and also answer questions and help tailor future studies. So, and then this is the second video I did, Doing Theology Better, Part 2, Synthetic Summary and Outlining. So in this one, I went back to John 1:1, but we compared it to 1:18, and we saw the similarities there, and that's what the arrows are pointing to. And this is sort of like a bookend, and this kind of refines or explains what's going on in 1:1. Session 3 and 4 will build on inductive study methods and exegesis for a reference point for learning the 5 levels of doing theology. And that's what we were doing. And so here's the inserted part from my paper where we have introduced synthetic summary and outlining. And so make a descriptive summary exegetical idea would be the first step in that. And so I say use John 1:18 to introduce the meaning of the word exegesis to explain. Expose them to Elliot Johnson's expository hermeneutics, Bauer and Trainer's inductive Bible study, and Hendrick's Living by the Book, and Zuck's basic Bible interpretation. Develop a basic exegetical idea. We'll talk about exegetical ideas later. John Wright, so here's running towards that direction. Remember, this is sort of like the descriptive summary, sort of like I'm making a preliminary and tentative commentary based on my first impression. John writes in the church age to a Gentile audience by a Jewish believer for evangelism and to reassure believers about the implications of the identity, nature, and role of Jesus as the Christ. The Apostle John introduces him as the Word, which existed with God at creation because he is God, meaning there are at least two persons that are God by essence. He uses the term Word to describe the Son because of its significance in Jewish and Greek thought to imply many things, including the reality that God has communicated with his creation and explained himself through his Son, who perfectly, and I think the next statement says represents. So going on there. So that's that statement there about explaining. And then this is the Greek word exegeomai, where we get exegesis from, to describe, explain, make known. And this is the original chart that I made, but then I took this chart and I made a version of it that I showed initially in the beginning of the video, and that's what I put in the paper. Okay, so there we are. There's the chart again. And then I say right here, describe exegesis as a more detailed inductive Bible study involving a more technical, detail level observation called recognition. So I'm not going into exegesis right now, but I just want them to understand that there's different levels of detail that you can go into concerning inductive study. And when you go in that level of detail, exegesis and inductive study can actually be described as the same thing or involving the same thing. I talked about Bauer and Trainer's book, which is pretty rigid as the methodology and exactness. And I'm going to be developing stuff concerning this book in upcoming videos. I've done several different videos on my channel working through the steps in my audience. And that means that I had to jump around to different books and different issues and wasn't able to hit everything directly as I would like, but it still challenged me and it would challenge the person watching it to see how inductive study can be adapted in a Sunday school setting where you don't get to pick the tasks, when you don't get to pick the scripture that you're studying or how long you're going to be in it and things like that. So this book divides up into observing and asking, answering or interpreting, evaluating, appropriate, and correlation. Another book that I mentioned that if I was teaching this in a group, I would mention Living by the Book, because even though it's not as rigid as Inductive Bible Study, it's the first book I ever read on Inductive Bible Study, and it's more accessible than Bauer and Trainer is, honestly. And of course, for interpretation, this is one of the classics to use for that by Zuck, Basic Bible Interpretation. So I would just orient them, look, you don't have to go full blown into this inductive Bible study methodology, but here are two sources that if you wanted to improve in inductive study and interpretation, these are reliable sources where understand that I like Bauer and Trainer, but they're not from the same tradition as me. You know, they're Wesleyan, and that's not a problem if you just remember that. I mean, just because you have the right method doesn't mean you're going to come to the right theology. I wish it was that easier, but somehow, because we're sinful, we're finite, we're all limited, we're all unique, we're all digging in different areas, we come up with different conclusions. But the benefit of that is that we can agree to a certain extent about methodology and approach, and then we can work and build in that particular area. And that's one thing I try to do with the layman seminary. We may not all agree denominationally or doctrinally in certain areas, but if I can help give you tools that will help you develop methodology, I can at least see, okay, where you went that way and why you went that way, and it helps me evaluate my own view and as well as views of others. So develop preliminary and tentative synthetic summary statements for observation, interpretation, and application. And then we're back to the chart where we're kind of talking about that right there. These are the beginning points for developing preliminary and tentative summary statements for exegetical, expositional, homiletical. So in other words, what I'm saying is you're developing these descriptive, interpretive, and applicational. And then when the next session comes in and you're learning about exegesis, you're going to see that these are preliminary and tentative also for this step here. And so that's what that's referring to. Now, this is a video that I did. I can't remember what year, but it's only 7 minutes long. And the reason that I did this video is because somebody messaged me and said, hey, I'm teaching some kids a class, and I need to be able to know how to prepare a lesson. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll just do John chapter 1. And I later on came up with the idea of Jesus is the only true superhero later on, but I titled it this way because the Gospel of John is the origin story. You know, the difference is that this origin story is that God has always existed. He's the creator of everything. He's the originator of everything. But so there's this shirt that I used where you have Jesus talking to these superheroes, you know, Marvel and DC. I think these are all Marvel. And he says right here, and that's how I save the world. Now, a danger of a shirt like this is it makes them think, oh, well, these people are mythical, and so is Jesus mythical? Or is this the understanding that he's the only true superhero because he's the only true God? You know, all these others are mythical ideals that people were trying to reach to, but all of these are flawed. But Jesus Christ is not flawed in any type of way. And he's not just a man with powers, he's the God man. So you could bring up a shirt like this and say, what, you know, to the kids, whatever age level they are, now, what do y'all think about this shirt? And that's going to engage them in a discussion. What are the similarities and the differences between it? You could go something like that. But when you're actually doing the study, the synthetic study, we're going to be operating at John 1 through 5. And so just pointing out the idea that a paragraph has one main idea. So each sentence is a subpoint, so we need to label them. And so what I did was I broke down the sentences that occur in 1 through 5. From that, I made a statement about verse 1. And this is sort of like your descriptive summaries. God has no beginning. That's pretty descriptive. So that made me think of an origin story like no other. And so this came in probably later on after I'd already written this statement. God has no beginning. Verse 2, the Son has always been with the Father, even though it doesn't use the word Son right there. It does use it in 1:18. And then 3, he is overall because he created all things. And then 4, he's the sustainer. And then 5, he's undefeatable. And so from these observations, from these brief descriptive summaries of these verses, which I could have gone on more detail, but I was trying to be concise. I got this: an origin story like no other, a relationship like no other, a creator like no other, a superpower like no other, a superhero like no other. So then I make a summary, a statement from that. The story of the superhero named the Word is like no other. He, as God, has no beginning, but rather he is the creator of all things that sustains creation and cannot be defeated by Satan. So you can see all of that coming together. And then the principle from that, which is sort of like an interpretive summary, the Word is unique because no one else is God. Okay, so the message point, this is where you could call it the applicational idea. If you're preaching or teaching, you could call it the homiletical or the teaching idea. And this is a lot of words here, but you would condense it down. And I think Jesus, the True Superhero, is the title that relates to that. But anyway, I'm going to give you this more expanded version here. Jesus is on this t-shirt with other superheroes, but he is not like them. He is the only one that could save the world. He is the only one that is God. Where other superheroes have their origin tales, he was the originator of all things. Comic book characters reveal that mankind is looking for a super being. The word super means above. So Superman means above or superior to man. Jesus is both because he created man. Some superheroes came from other planets, but the Word left heaven and took on the flesh of a human. Left heaven and took on the flesh of a human. All other superhero stories are watered down versions of the greatest story about the greatest hero after all. So application. You could tell the children, you could buy this shirt to open the conversation, or just share this shirt's picture on your Facebook, to get them discussion, or talk about the shirt's message. These are just different ideas. I don't know how the parents would feel like if you send them home. Hey, my Sunday school teacher told me to buy this shirt so I can evangelize. The parents may not like it, it's costing money, but anybody can share it as a meme or whatever. So then you've taken them from descriptive principle to application, or descriptive interpretive application, and you're doing synthesis here, but you want to place it in a message order. And so that's what I have here. Is you have the introduction would be the t-shirt. The explanation of this would be what we were reading earlier. Jesus is on the t-shirt with other superheroes and so on. You know what I'm talking about there. And then the application would be put there. And so you could look at that, and this all you would have to see, and it would trigger everything that we're doing here. And there's another video that Janet and I did, I think it was later on, where we did John 1 through 18 at an inductive study, and we'll be interacting with some of the content in this video in the next video, because I'm doing synthesis here, and then I'm going to do inductive doing theology better by inductive study in the next video. I needed to split them up because I felt like that even though I mentioned inductive first in the chart, synthesis naturally follows, because it's so much easier to understand than full-blown inductive Bible study. So going back to the playlist, I know some of these numbers are off. I need to add, find out which ones I don't have added, but descriptive summary Bible study method. This is anytime I've used a descriptive summary method on a particular passage or whatever. It's pretty much the same thing as synthetic Bible study method. See, the reason I label some of these playlists differently is because people know these concepts by different terms, and then develop a descriptive summary for books as a whole. And so this focuses on that, but you'll find these incorporated into here. And this is the one that this video right here will be added to, theological method. And I'll probably will be adding the doing theology better playlist soon. So that's it. So anyway, if you've been blessed by this video, subscribe, share it with others, hit the bell if you want notifications, give us a thumbs up if you like it, and keep this ministry in prayer. God bless.